I walked into my brother's engagement party. The bride leaned toward her circle of friends and whispered with a sneer, "The stinky country girl is here." She did not know I owned the hotel, or that her family was about to learn that fact the bloody way. The air inside the grand ballroom was thick enough to chew. It was a suffocating blend of expensive French perfume, lilies that smelled like a funeral, and the sharp, metallic tang of chilled champagne. Above us, the three massive chandeliers, each containing exactly 4,000 hand-cut crystals, hummed with a low electrical frequency that vibrated in my teeth. To the 300 guests swirling in silk and velvet, it was the sound of luxury. To me, it was a maintenance report. I knew that the north chandelier had a faulty ballast. I knew the HVAC system was currently pushing 68-degree air at 40% humidity to preserve the floral arrangements. I knew every square inch of the Italian marble beneath my boots because I had signed the check for it 3 years ago. I stood by the entrance, my hands shoved deep into the pockets of my canvas jacket. I was a smudge of dirt on a polished lens. My jeans were worn at the knees, and my work boots carried the dust of a double shift at the construction site of my newest boutique wing. I had come straight from the dirt because I wanted to see if they would still look at me the same way after all the anonymous help I had sent. My brother, Ethan, stood near the stage, looking every bit the golden sun. His tuxedo probably cost more than the first car I ever owned. He was laughing, a sound that lacked the jagged edges of the life I lived. Next to him was Lena. She looked like a swan made of ice, draped in a white gown that cost $10,000. Money that, indirectly, had likely come from my own bank account through the silent subsidies I provided our mother. I felt the familiar ghost of my childhood rising up to greet me. It was a cold, hollow sensation in the center of my chest. For 32 years, I had been the invisible child. I was the one who kept the lights on while Ethan took the stage. I was the builder of stability, just like my grandmother had promised. I had learned early on that taking up very little space was the only way to survive a family that viewed my quietness as a lack of ambition. My mother, Margaret, spotted me from across the room. Her smile did not just fade, it retracted like a snail into a shell. She crossed the floor with a stiff, practiced elegance, her heels clicking a rhythmic warning against the stone. When she reached me, she did not hug me. She did not ask how the drive from the valley had been. She simply leaned in close, her eyes darting around to ensure no one was watching the stain on her perfect evening. "Amelia?" she whispered, her voice tight with a suppressed fury. "Look at you. You look like you just crawled out of a trench. Did you even consider wearing something appropriate? Lena comes from a refined family. This is the most important night of Ethan's life, and you show up looking like a hired hand." "I came straight from work, Mom," I said. My voice was steady, a low contrast to her frantic pitch. I thought family mattered more than the thread count of my shirt. She sighed, that same tired, theatrical sigh she had used since I was 7 years old. It was the sound of a woman who had given up on a lost cause. "Just stay in the shadows, please. Do not make a scene. I will tell people you are a distant cousin if they ask." She turned away before I could respond, her attention already snapping back to the center of the room, where the light was brightest. I watched her go, feeling the weight of the lee. I had told myself for years. I had believed that if I worked hard enough and provided enough secret safety for them, eventually they would see me. But standing there in the peripheral vision of their lives, I realized that being invisible was not a shield. It was a cage I had built for myself. I moved toward the champagne bar, my footsteps silent. I was a ghost in my own house. The guests ignored me, stepping around me as if I were a piece of furniture being moved to storage. I took a glass of water, feeling the cold condensation soak into my palm. I was not angry yet. Anger is a hot, messy emotion that clouds judgment. I was something much more dangerous. I was observant. I watched Lena holding court at the center of the room. She was beautiful in a way that felt manufactured. Every gesture calculated for the maximum social yield. She did not love Ethan. She loved the way the light hit her when she stood next to him. And then, as the music shifted into a softer, more intimate tempo, I saw it. The glint of silver and the specific, teardrop shape of a pendant resting against her collarbone. My grandmother's necklace. The one promised to me. The air in the room seemed to vanish. My pulse, usually a steady 60 beats per minute, spiked into a frantic rhythm. That necklace was not just jewelry. It was the only piece of truth I had left. Seeing it on her felt like a physical violation of the past. It was the spark that finally lit the fuse. The party was no longer a chore to be endured. It was a crime scene, and I was the only witness. I set my glass down on the mahogany counter and felt the cold resolve settle over me like a shroud. The night was only beginning, and by the end of it, the refined family the Burns had so desperately craved was going to be dismantled, piece by piece, right here in the house that I built. The sight of the necklace acted like a slow, acting poison, numbing my limbs while my mind sharpened into a jagged blade. I stood frozen by the bar, the condensation from my glass dripping onto the expensive marble floor, mirroring the sweat beginning to pool at the base of my neck. My grandmother had died in a room that smelled of industrial floor, wax and fading hope, her fingers trembling as she gripped mine. She had promised that silver teardrop to me. She told me it was the anchor for the woman who would build the family's future. Now, seeing it rise and fall against Lena's chest felt like watching a thief wear a trophy stripped from a grave. I set my glass down with a heavy thud and began to navigate the sea of silk and tailored wool. I did not look at the faces of the guests. I focused entirely on my mother, Margaret, who was currently laughing at something a man in a pinstriped suit was saying. I reached her side and placed a hand on her elbow. It was not a gentle touch. "Mom," I said, my voice cutting through her manufactured joy like a wire. "We need to talk. Now." She turned, her eyes flashing with immediate irritation. She excused herself from the group with a trite remark about family duties and pulled me toward a flower-shrouded pillar. "Amelia, I told you to stay out of the light. What on earth is so urgent that you had to interrupt my conversation with the board members?" "The necklace," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but vibrating with a decade of suppressed resentment. "Why is Lena wearing grandmother's pendant? You told me it was in the safe deposit box. You told me it was being cleaned for my 35th birthday." Margaret's face didn't crumple. Instead, it hardened into a mask of cold, practical logic. Ethan asked for it. He wanted to give Lena something that signified her entry into this family. She is a refined woman, Amelia. She understands the weight of legacy. You spend your days in the dirt and your nights in cheap motels. What would you do with a piece of jewelry like that? You would probably lose it on a job site. "It wasn't yours to give," I said, the words feeling like stones in my mouth. "Everything in this family belongs to the person who can best represent it." She snapped back. "Now, please, go find some hors d'oeuvres and keep your mouth shut. You are embarrassing yourself." She walked away, leaving me standing in the shadow of a $2,000 floral arrangement. The rejection was old, a familiar ache I had lived with since I was a child. But the theft was new. I looked back at Lena. She was standing 20 feet away, the light from the north chandelier catching the silver teardrop. She noticed me watching her. She didn't look away. Instead, she offered a slow, triumphant smile and adjusted the pendant, making sure the metal caught the light right in my eyes. I felt the heat rising in my face, a dangerous, reckless urge to scream the truth at the top of my lungs. I wanted to tell the whole room that this party was happening in a hotel I purchased with my own blood and sweat. I wanted to tell them that the mortgage on the family home had been paid by an anonymous trust I funded every quarter. But I forced my breathing to slow. I forced my heart to find its professional rhythm. As the music swelled, Lena began to move toward me. She glided across the floor, her white dress trailing behind her like a shroud. She didn't look like a bride. She looked like a predator that had just finished a successful hunt. When she reached me, she didn't wait for me to speak. She leaned in, the scent of her perfume cloying and sweet, like fruit beginning to rot. "You look like you have something to say, Amelia?" she murmured, her voice a silk ribbon wrapped around a razor. "But we both know you won't say it. You are the quiet one, the invisible one, the one who sends the checks and waits for a thank you that never comes." The shock hit me harder than the theft of the necklace. I had spent years hiding my tracks, using 3 different shell companies and a lawyer in another state to keep my family from feeling the weight of the debt they owed me. "How do you know about that?" I asked, my voice cracking for the first time. Lena laughed, a light, melodic sound that chilled my blood. "I made it my business to know. You see, dear, you think you are the only builder in this room. But I am an architect of a different kind. I build opportunities. And your family, they are a magnificent foundation. They are so desperate to believe they are still wealthy and important that they will believe almost anything as long as it is said with a smile and a refined accent." She reached out and patted my arm, her touch light and dismissive. "I know exactly what you are. You are a girl who is desperate to matter to people who have already forgotten you exist. That is why you keep paying the bills. That is why you are standing here in those ridiculous boots, hoping someone will notice the sacrifice. But they won't. And once I marry Ethan, I am going to make sure the silent partner is retired for good. It will be much cleaner that way." She turned on her heel, the silver necklace dancing against her skin as she walked back toward the stage. I stood perfectly still, my hands clenched into fists in my pockets. I had come here tonight hoping for a crumb of belonging. Instead, I had found a parasite that had already crawled inside my family's heart. I watched her rejoin Ethan, watched him wrap an arm around her waist, completely oblivious to the fact that his world was being measured for a casket. I didn't cry. I didn't chase after her. The part of me that had been waiting for a seat at the table finally died in that moment. It was a quiet death, unmourned by the 300 people laughing around me. In its place, something cold and architectural began to rise. I didn't need their love. I needed their attention. And for the first time in my life, I was going to make sure I had every single bit of it. I turned and walked toward the service elevators, my boots clicking against the marble with a new, deliberate purpose. The invisible girl was gone. The owner had arrived. I pushed through the heavy velvet curtains and stepped into the north alcove, the muffled roar of the party instantly turning into a low, oceanic hum. The air here was cooler, stripped of the cloying floral scents and the humidity of 300 bodies. My pulse was a frantic hammer against my ribs, but my hands were steady. Lena's words were still echoing in my mind, a toxic playback of every insecurity I had ever nursed. She knew about the money. She knew about the secret life I had built. She had taken my grandmother's necklace and used it to bait a trap, thinking I was too weak to spring it. I leaned my back against the cold stone wall and closed my eyes, forcing myself to breathe in counts of 4. I was not the girl they saw. I was the woman who had built an empire of hospitality from a single suitcase and a mountain of overtime hours. I was the person who understood that every structure had a load-bearing wall, and every lie had a point of failure. I was about to move toward the service elevators when I heard the heavy thud of a door closing nearby. I froze, my boots silent on the thick industrial carpeting of the hallway. Two voices drifted toward me from the direction of the staff entrance. One was sharp and nasal, Howard Whitmore. The other was a low, guttural murmur I did not recognize. "You need to settle down," the stranger said. "The wedding is in 3 weeks. That is when the accounts merge. That is when we get our hands on the Burns holdings." 3 weeks is too long," Howard snapped. His voice was stripped of the jovial, paternal warmth he had been performing on the ballroom floor. It sounded thin and desperate. "The creditors are calling the house twice a day. If they see the news about the liquidation in the city, this whole thing collapses. We need them to believe we are the ones bringing the dowry to the table. I need a bridge loan and I need it tonight." "Then use the girl," the stranger replied. "Lena has Ethan wrapped around her finger. Tell him there is a temporary cash flow issue with the overseas accounts. He will sign whatever you put in front of him to keep her happy." "I have already tried that," Howard muttered. "The mother is the problem. Margaret is protective of the estate, even if she is a fool for status. But the sister, the one who looks like she belongs in a kitchen, Lena says she is the real source. Lena says there is an anonymous trust that has been feeding them for a decade. If we can find the key to that, we do not just survive. We win." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. They were not just social climbers. They were scavengers. They were circling my family, like wolves around a campfire, waiting for the light to flicker so they could move in for the kill. They thought my family was a well of untapped wealth, never realizing that the well was me. Howard stepped into view for a brief second, his face illuminated by a flickering exit sign. Gunn was the polished patriarch. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes darting back and forth with a panicked, feral energy. He looked like a man standing on a crumbling ledge, and he was planning to pull my brother down with him to soften the fall. He checked his gold watch, a watch that was likely unpaid for, and straightened his tuxedo jacket. He took a deep breath, smoothing his expression back into a mask of arrogance, and began to walk back toward the ballroom. I stayed in the shadows until the sound of his footsteps vanished. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. The anger that had been simmering in my chest since I saw the necklace suddenly crystallized into a cold, hard certainty. This was no longer about a stolen heirloom or a bruised ego. This was about survival. Lena had called me desperate to matter. She thought my silence was a sign of my insignificance. She believed that because I chose to take up very little space, I had no power to defend it. She was wrong. In the world of architecture, the most important structures are often the ones you cannot see. The foundations buried deep in the earth. The steel beams hidden behind the drywall. I pulled my phone from my pocket, the screen glowing bright in the dim hallway. My fingers flew across the glass. I did not call my mother, and I did not call Ethan. They were still under the spell of the Whitmore mirage. I called the only people who knew the truth of what I had built. "Daniel," I said when the line picked up. "I am in the north hallway of the flagship. I need a full tactical audit on Howard and Lena Whitmore. I want their credit history, their previous names, and every legal filing associated with their social security numbers in the last 15 years. And call Rachel. Tell her I need the deed to the Burns estate pulled from the vault. We are going to war, and I want the heavy artillery ready by the time the toasts start." I ended the call and looked at the closed doors of the ballroom. I could still hear the music, a cheerful, hollow sound that felt like an insult. I was no longer the invisible sister. I was the architect of their undoing. And as I turned toward the elevators to head to my private office on the top floor, I realized that for the first time in my life, I was not afraid of being seen. I was looking forward to it. The service elevator climbed in a smooth, silent ascent that made my stomach drop. As the doors slid open on the 40th floor, the festive noise of the engagement party was replaced by the low hum of industrial fans and the scent of expensive leather. This was my command center. I walked down the dim corridor to the parking garage level, my heavy boots echoing against the concrete. I reached my car, a nondescript black sedan that looked like 1,000 others in the city, and sat in the driver's seat. I did not turn on the engine. I needed the silence. I pulled out my phone and accessed the encrypted server that held the truth of the last 12 years. I stared at the spreadsheets, the rows of numbers glowing white against the dark cabin of the car. There it was. July 14, 2020. A payment of $15,000 for Ethan's tuition. September 3, 2021. $8,000 for my mother's emergency hip surgery. Every mortgage payment, every property tax bill, every repair for a leaky roof had been filtered through a series of anonymous trusts. My family believed they were living on the dwindling remains of my father's old investments. They never suspected that their comfortable reality was a house of cards I was holding up with both hands. My thumb hovered over the latest transaction. I had just authorized a $20,000 wire for the wedding flowers and the catering. I felt a surge of cold, bitter irony. I was paying for the very champagne that Lena was currently using to toast my insignificance. I opened a second window and began to pull up public records on the Whitmore family. I had learned a long time ago that people like Howard and Lena do not just appear out of nowhere. They have a trail, even if it is buried under layers of digital dust. I started with their primary residence, a 4-story townhouse in the city, currently listed as being in active litigation. I moved to their business filings. Whitmore Global Holdings. It had a prestigious name but 0 employees and a mailing address that traced back to a post office box in a strip mall. The deeper I dug, the more the refined veneer of the Whitmore family began to peel away. I found a tax lien for $300,000 in another state under the name Elaine Whitmore, Lena's mother. Then, I found the most damning piece of all. A quiet court filing from 6 months ago. Howard Whitmore had filed for a structured bankruptcy, citing over $2 million in unsecured debt. They were not just broke. They were drowning. I leaned my head back against the headrest and closed my eyes. The pieces of the puzzle were clicking into place with a terrifying, mechanical precision. The Whitmores were not looking for a marriage. They were looking for a life raft. They saw my family's name, the history of the Burns estate, and the visible signs of wealth I had provided. And they assumed they had found a gold mine. They had no idea that the mine was empty, and the only thing keeping the lights on was the sister they had just dismissed as a stinky country girl. If I let this wedding happen, Howard and Lena would move into the family home. They would strip the equity, sell the heirlooms, and leave my mother and Ethan in the middle of a financial wasteland. They would take the necklace, the house, and every cent I had worked to save, and they would do it all while laughing at my lack of style. The fear I had felt in the hallway was gone, replaced by a cold, methodical resolve. This was a hostile takeover. In business, when a predator tries to strip your assets, you do not beg for mercy. You cut off their access. You poison the well. I sent a quick, urgent text to Daniel Cross, my head of security. I need the full dossiers on Howard's previous business partners in Florida and New York. I want to see the patterns of liquidation. And Daniel, check the ballroom AV feed. I want to know exactly which server controls the digital displays behind the stage. I watched the delivered icon appear on the screen. My hands were no longer shaking. I felt a strange, detached calm. The kind an architect feels when they realize a building is structurally unsound and must be demolished for the safety of the public. I had spent my life building things up, protecting my family from the harsh realities of the world. But to save them now, I would have to become the thing that tore their world apart. I looked at the time on the dashboard. 10:15. The speeches were scheduled for 11 o'clock. I had 45 minutes to finalize the demolition. I put the car in gear and drove slowly out of the garage, the tires chirping against the epoxy floor. I was going back to the party, but not as a guest. I was returning as the landlord. And the Whitmores, lease on my family was about to be terminated. I stepped back into the hotel lobby, the transition from the silent parking garage to the hum of the flagship property, feeling like a shift in atmospheric pressure. I walked past the concierge desk with a measured pace, my expression unreadable. To the staff, I was a ghost they had been trained to ignore unless I was giving an order. To the guests, I was a nobody. I took the stairs to the mezzanine level, moving toward the management suite, hidden behind a discreet mahogany door that lacked a nameplate. Inside the quiet room, the air was filtered and still. Daniel Cross was already there, leaning over a console of glowing monitors. He did not look up when I entered. He simply pointed to the center screen. Daniel had been with me since I opened my first 30-room motel in a dusty corner of the state. He knew my history, my family, and my capacity for cold calculation. "You were right to look deeper," Daniel said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "The Whitmores do not just have debt. They have a signature. They find families with high social standing but low liquid cash. They propose a merger. Use the engagement period to take out loans against the Marks' assets, and then vanish before the first anniversary. It is a corporate raid disguised as a romance." I walked over to the monitors, my eyes scanning the documents. "What about the girl? What about Lena?" Daniel tapped a key, and a high-resolution image filled the screen. It was a mugshot from 7 years ago in Nevada. The woman in the photo had dark hair and a jagged scar along her jawline that had since been expertly hidden by plastic surgery. But the eyes were unmistakable. They were the same predatory eyes that had looked at me with such disdain in the ballroom. "Her name is Elaine Vance," Daniel explained. "She has used 4 different aliases in 3 states. She is not a socialite. She is a closer. Howard Whitmore is her father, or at least that is what the birth certificate says, though even that might be a forgery. They are a 2-person wrecking crew." I felt a wave of nausea, followed by a surge of pure, icy clarity. I thought of Ethan, who was currently laughing and drinking champagne with a woman who viewed him as nothing more than a line item on a balance sheet. I thought of my mother, who had handed over my grandmother's necklace to a career criminal because she was so desperate to be refined. "I have the forensic accounting from Hannah," Daniel continued, pulling up a series of complex flowcharts. "They have already made their move. Yesterday, Howard filed a forged power of attorney to attempt a bridge loan against the Burns family estate. They think they are borrowing against your mother's equity. They have no idea that the deed is actually held by your holding company, Amelia. They are trying to steal from you without even realizing you are the one they are robbing." I stared at the flowchart, seeing the red lines of debt intersecting with the blue lines of my family's history. It was a map of a looming disaster. If Howard succeeded in securing that loan, the ensuing legal battle would strip my mother of everything she owned before I could even prove the forgery in court. The damage to the Burns name would be permanent. "The toast is in 20 minutes, I said, my voice sounding hollow in the small room. "They are going to announce the merger tonight. They want the public witness to solidify the social standing before the checks clear." "What do you want to do?" Daniel asked. He turned to look at me, his eyes searching mine. We can call the police now. We can have them picked up in the hallway. It would be quiet. Minimal drama for the hotel. I looked at the monitor showing the ballroom feed. I saw Lena standing on the stage, her hand looped through Ethan's arm, the silver necklace catching the light. I saw my mother in the front row, looking happier than I had seen her in years, finally feeling like she belonged to the elite world she had always craved. No, I said, and the word felt like a seal on a tomb. If we do it quietly, my mother will spend the rest of her life believing I ruined her happiness out of spite. She will make Lena a martyr. Ethan will never see the truth because he will be too busy mourning a lie. For them to be safe, they have to see the rot for themselves. They have to watch the mask fall in front of everyone they respect. I turned away from the screens and walked toward the door. My heart was no longer racing. The invisible child had spent 30 years being pushed into the corners of this family, watching and waiting. Now, I was going to use that invisibility as my greatest weapon. Daniel, bypass the ballroom's internal server. I commanded, my hand on the door handle. I want the management suit's feed to override the engagement slideshow. When Howard stands up to speak about legacy, I want everyone in that room to see the legacy of Elaine Vance. Put the bankruptcy filings on the main screen. Put the Nevada mugshot on the side monitors. And make sure the audio from Howard's phone call by the elevator is queued up. Amelia, Daniel said, his voice soft with a hint of warning. There is no going back after this. You are exposing yourself as much as them. Your family will know everything? Good? I replied. It is time they learned that the girl they ignored is the only reason they have a roof over their heads. It is time for the truth to be the only thing left standing. I walked out of the suite and back toward the ballroom, the click of my boots on the floor sounding like a countdown. The architecture of the lie was about to come down, and I was the one pulling the lever. I had spent my life as a builder, but tonight, I was going to be the demolition crew. I walked back into the ballroom, just as the lights began to dim. The timing as precise as a heartbeat. The shifting atmosphere was a physical weight, a collective holding of breath from 300 people as the music slowed to a gentle, romantic hum. This was the moment of peak illusion. On the small, raised stage, Howard Whitmore stood with a champagne flute in one hand and a microphone in the other. He looked every bit the billionaire patriarch. His silver hair gleaming under the spotlights, his posture radiating a confidence that was entirely unearned. Beside him, Lena and Ethan were framed by two massive floral arrangements of white hydrangeas and roses, looking like the crowning figures on a wedding cake. The stakes were no longer just about my family's pride. As I stood at the very back of the room, my shoulder blades pressed against the cold mahogany of the heavy exit doors, I realized that if I failed now, the Whitmores would walk away with my family's legacy and my own hard-won empire. My mother sat in the front row, her hands clasped under her chin, her eyes shining with the kind of validation she had spent 40 years chasing. If I pulled the trigger on this truth, I was not just destroying the villains. I was shattering the only version of happiness she understood. For a split second, my ghost whispered to me. It told me to stay invisible. It told me to let them have the lie, because the truth would be too heavy for them to carry. But then I looked at Lena. She was wearing my grandmother's necklace, the silver teardrop resting right above her heart. She caught my eye across the crowded room and gave the smallest, most infinitesimal tilt of her head. A victory lap in a single movement. She thought she had already won. She thought the stinky country girl was beaten. Howard cleared his throat, and the room went silent. Family, he began, his voice amplified and resonant. As the only true currency we have in this life, Trust is the foundation of every great empire. Tonight, we do not just celebrate a marriage. We celebrate the merger of two great legacies. That was my cue. I did not hesitate. I reached into my pocket and pressed a single button on my phone. The massive high-definition screens behind Howard, which had been cycling through soft focus photos of the couple at sunset, suddenly flickered. A sharp, digital static hissed through the speakers, cutting through the romantic music. The crowd murmured, a few people laughing softly at what they assumed was a technical glitch in such a high-end hotel. Howard paused, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second before he recovered. It seems our celebration is so electric we have blown a fuse. He joked, and the room chuckled. Then the static cleared. A stark, white document appeared on the main screen. It was a financial summary from the state of Nevada. The words, Chapter 7 Bankruptcy Filing, written in bold, black letters at the top. Beneath it, the name Howard Whitmore was highlighted in a pulsing red glow. The murmurs in the room changed instantly. The laughter died, replaced by a cold, sharp intake of breath. I watched the color drain from Howard's face. It was not a gradual fading, it was a sudden, violent evacuation of blood. His hand, the one holding the champagne glass, began to tremble. "This is a mistake." Howard stammered into the microphone, the feedback whining as he stepped back. "We have a technical issue. Staff, where is the manager?" He looked toward the wings of the stage, but no one moved. My staff stayed exactly where I had ordered them to stay. The image on the screen shifted. Now, a mugshot appeared on the side monitors. It was Lena, her hair dark and messy, a prison identification number displayed across her chest. The name beneath it did not say Lena Whitmore. It said Elaine Vance. The room was so silent I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Lena froze, her hand still looped through Ethan's arm. She looked like a statue of salt. Ethan was staring at the screen, his head whipping back and forth, between the image of the criminal and the woman standing next to him. He looked like he was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. This was the lowest point. I saw my mother's face as she realized what she was looking at. The pride in her eyes was being replaced by a confused, jagged terror. I felt a surge of grief for her, but I did not stop. The architecture of the lie had to be leveled to the ground. I pushed off the wall and began to walk down the center aisle. Every head turned. The guests parted like water before a ship. My boots, heavy and caked with the dust of the real world, sounded like thunder on the marble. I was no longer taking up very little space. I was the only thing in the room that mattered. As I reached the front, Howard tried to step away, his eyes darting toward the exits. But two of my security guards, men I had hired and trained, stepped out from behind the curtains. They did not touch him. They simply occupied the space he wanted to inhabit. Howard turned back to the microphone, his voice a frantic, high-pitched whine. "This is a fabrication. This is a jealous girl trying to ruin a beautiful night?" I reached the stage and stepped up onto the platform. I did not look at the guests. I looked at my brother. Ethan's eyes were wide and wet, his face a mask of total devastation. Then I turned to Howard and held out my hand. The microphone. "Howard," I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried to every corner of the ballroom. "I think you have said enough about trust for one night." He looked at me, and for the first time, he saw me. He did not see a country girl. He saw the person who owned the ground he was standing on. He saw the end of his game. His fingers loosened, and I took the microphone from him. The transition was over. The lie was dead, and now it was time for the owner to speak. I stood on the stage, the microphone heavy in my hand, feeling the collective weight of 300 pairs of eyes. The digital silence behind me was deafening. The screens still screaming the truth of Howard Whitmore's bankruptcy and Lena's criminal record. Lena lunged toward me, her face contorted into a mask of feral desperation. "She is lying!" Lena shrieked, her voice cracking as she reached for the microphone. "She is a bitter, jealous hermit who cannot stand to see Ethan happy. She made these documents up. She is obsessed with us." I did not flinch. I did not even look at her. I looked at the back of the room where the heavy oak doors swung open. 3 people in dark, professional suits entered the ballroom. Leading them was a woman with a badge clipped to her belt and a folder in her hand. The chatter in the room died a second death. "My name is Amelia Burns," I said into the microphone, my voice echoing with a calm authority that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. "And I think everyone deserves to know exactly what they are celebrating tonight. These records were not fabricated. They were verified by 3 separate law enforcement agencies and my own legal counsel. The woman you know as Lena is Elaine Vance, and the man beside her is currently under investigation for felony wire fraud and identity theft." Howard tried to bolt toward the side exit, but 2 of my security team stepped into his path with the silent efficiency of a closing trap. He collapsed back against a floral arrangement, knocking over a vase of white roses. The water spilled across the stage, soaking the hem of Lena's $10,000 dress. "Ethan," Lena sobbed, turning to my brother and grabbing his tuxedo jacket with both hands. "Ethan, look at me. You know me. We have been together for a year. You know I love you. Please, tell her to stop. Tell her she is crazy." Ethan stood perfectly still. He looked down at her hands, then up at the screens, then finally at me. I could see the foundations of his world crumbling in real time. The golden boy was gone, replaced by a man who realized he had been nothing more than a mark for a professional predator. "I do not know you," Ethan whispered. The microphone caught it, broadcasting his heartbreak to every corner of the room. "I do not think I ever did." He reached out and slowly, deliberately, uncoupled her fingers from his sleeve. Lena let out a sound that was half scream and half sob. She turned on me then, her composure finally shattering into 1,000 jagged pieces. She lunged forward, her nails clawing for my face. But a security guard intercepted her with a firm, practiced grip. As she struggled, the silver teardrop necklace, my grandmother's necklace, snagged on the guard's sleeve. The delicate chain snapped with a sharp, metallic ping. The pendant hit the marble floor, with a sound far louder than it should have made. It skittered across the stone and came to rest at my boots. I knelt down and picked it up. The silver was cold in my palm, grounded and heavy. It felt like the promise was finally being kept. The woman in the dark suit reached the stage. "Howard Whitmore, Elaine Vance. You are required to come with us for questioning regarding the fraudulent loan application filed against the Burns estate." The room watched in a daze as the refined family was escorted out of the ballroom. Lena was still screaming, calling me a ghost, a nothing, a country girl. Her voice faded as the doors closed behind her, leaving a hollow, ringing silence in the air. I looked at my mother. She was still sitting in the front row, her face buried in her hands. She was not crying for the Whitmores. She was crying because the illusion of her life had been stripped away in public. I stepped to the edge of the stage and looked out at the guests, the elite of the city who had spent the night ignoring me. "The food is paid